This is a primer that explains the current Texas Election Code, Chapter 65 method of hand counting of all hand-marked paper ballots for the state of Texas. There are 254 individual counties in Texas, and each county has its own unique system of localized voting. This method has been in place in Texas since the 1800s, long before electricity became available and long before computers were invented. The system is nonpartisan as it requires at least 2 election officers appointed by the presiding judge to be present during the process. As background, electronic voting machines were introduced in the year 2000 after the hanging Chad incident in Florida, where the final results of a very close presidential race dragged on for weeks. Multiple audits and recounts were conducted with a special focus to determine voter intent from the punched paper card ballots. The cards in question were either not fully punched, dimpled, or the punched Chad stayed attached and was left hanging. The Help America Vote Act was established 2 years later in 2002 and was set up to create standards for counting disputed ballots and to avoid issues like those in Florida in 2000. It also created the United States Election Assistance Commission, or EAC, which set guidelines for all electronic voting systems. Unfortunately, when electronic voting systems were introduced, the American public could not foresee that domestic as well as foreign bad actors could hack into and access the computers and networks to modify the software, manipulate voter registration as well as electronic poll book records, flip votes, or simply add or delete votes to cheat the system. Bad actors could also track early voting and monitor mail-in ballot requests. From this, they can predict voting trends and then counter those trends by injecting fraudulent mail-in ballots into the system, knowing signature verification and mail-in ballot chain of custody protocols are not universally enforced. No one was aware of programmed software backdoors or embedded hardware devices that could communicate through Wi-Fi and Bluetooth signals and manipulate the system as well. These cyber attacks help create election victories for pre-selected candidates and issues, and more often, these selections were contrary to the will of the people. Over time, America has grown accustomed to technology and accepts computerized convenience and complexity for most everything. But, when applied to voting, America sacrificed election security, transparency, accuracy, and accountability. With electronic voting systems, we are voting through black boxes. No one is permitted to examine the computer source codes during the entire voting process and subsequent reporting of results. Information goes in, and numbers come out, and we are just told to trust the machine output and accept the results. Many systems are online all the time, through vendor maintenance and support programs named ILO and iDRAC. ILO stands for Integrated Lights Out for Hewlett-Packard machines, and iDRAC stands for Integrated Dell Remote Access Controller. In addition to Secretary of State and Central Tabulation Links, Homeland Security, through the Center for Internet Security, mandates devices called Albert sensors to be connected inside the firewalls of election systems to monitor for Internet attacks. What's more, during Election Day, voting data is fed directly to outside reporting services of Sitel, Clarity Reporting, and Edison Research, who format the data and send it to news outlets to report elections real-time to the American audience. Sitel has main offices in Spain. It is unsettling to know that other companies and possibly other countries access electronic voting machine data in real time and know your votes before you do. In addition, as first responders, police, fire, medical, and utilities are considered critical infrastructure and are provided the highest, always-on, priority cell communications from AT&T's cellular communication system named FirstNet. The Department of Homeland Security has declared election systems as critical infrastructure, and therefore are open to the same high priority, always-on, cell communication systems as first responders. This coverage assures electronic poll pads, election management systems, and tabulators with internet connection capabilities could be connected as critical infrastructure to the FirstNet cellular network and given priority service, regardless of the presence or quality of local wired internet service. To sum up, each of these multiple connections are potential entry points for hackers to intercept and manipulate the election results without detection. Cyber experts who test electronic voting systems and who are also ethical white hat hackers report that they can hack into any electronic voting system within 5 minutes or less. As the public is becoming increasingly aware of the vulnerabilities of electronic voting systems, many are urging county commissioners to abandon those systems, go to paper poll books that cannot be hacked, eliminate early, as well as mail-in voting, and perform same-day, in precinct voting, as they return to the standard Texas Chapter 65 method as the only way to protect vote integrity. Election day in-person voting is the best way to minimize bad actors from predicting voter trends ahead of time using mail-in and early voting data. This action removes a tool the hackers used to secretly inject phantom votes to counteract and override the vote of a real person. With so much public distrust of electronic voting, county commissioners and election officials could become real heroes if they act now to return voter integrity to elections by going to hand counting of all hand-marked paper ballots. This movement is made even more urgent because the Texas Election Code requires that any electronic voting systems follow EAC guidelines. Texas Election Code Chapter 122.001, Section A3, states that a voting system may not be used in an election unless it complies with the voting system standards adopted by the Election Assistance Commission, shown in Figure 1. One of those standards is the requirement of a voting system to be tested by an accredited voting system test laboratory, or VSTL, shown in Figure 2. The VSTL accreditation certificates are required to be signed by the chair of the EAC designated in Figure 3. These certificates have a 2-year expiration. No accreditation certificates have been signed by the chair of the EAC since 2015. Meaning there have been no legally accredited voting system test laboratories able to test voting systems. Thus, there are no voting systems currently certified for use in Texas that meet the requirements of Texas law to be able to be used in elections. This realization results in the Chapter 65 method of hand counting of all hand-marked paper ballots as the only way to conduct a legal election in Texas. Any Texas county who knowingly authorizes the continued use of uncertified electronic voting machines is willingly violating the guidelines of the Texas Election Code. So the most prudent option is for counties to abandon the electronic voting systems, remove them from their proposed budget expenditures, so taxpayer money will not be wasted on uncertified systems, and move immediately to set up systems for hand counting of all hand-marked paper ballots for future elections. The Texas Chapter 65 method is very simple. For early voting, when the period for early voting ends, ballots are brought to the elections office and the appropriate chain of custody performed. Ballots for a given location are counted to verify total ballots cast at that location. Those ballots are then sorted by precinct and tabulated according to the exact same Texas 65 method of hand counting the ballots as for Election Day as follows. On Election Day, at least 3 secured ballot boxes are present at the polling location and verified empty at the start of the day. After hand marking their ballot, voters deposit their voted ballots into ballot box 1. Hand counting can begin if at least 1 hour has passed, and there are at least 10 ballots cast. This safeguards that no individual voter can be identified with a specific ballot, and voter privacy is always maintained. Ballot box 1 may be removed from the voting area to be counted, and switched out with ballot box 2 under the overview of the elections officer. The switching or rotation of ballot boxes 1 and 2 will guarantee that there is always a ballot box for voters to deposit their completed ballots while the removed ballots are being counted. Box 1 is taken to a separate area of the polling place, and a counting team of 4 people can begin the count. 1 person handles the ballots, the caller. 3 other people, the markers, each independently record the votes on their separate tally sheet on a large form prescribed by the Secretary of State, or the county may custom design their own tally sheets based on the Secretary of State form. It could be 1 page or a booklet with multiple pages depending on the race. The form contains space for the date and type of election, precinct number or polling place name, as well as a space for the counting team member to sign. The tally sheet lists each contest and candidate in a column on the left side of the sheet in the same order as on the ballot. To the right of each candidate's name are rows with sections for the tally marks, and at the end of each row is a totals column. The caller starts with a ballot and calls the contest and the candidate receiving the vote in that contest, all the way down the ballot. As the caller calls a vote for a given candidate as well as any measures being voted for or against, the markers will make a small vertical tally mark. If no votes are marked for a specific race, the caller announces, undervote. At this time, the markers place a mark in the undervote column of their tally sheet. If more than 1 vote is marked, the caller announces, overvote, and the markers make a mark in the overvote column of the tally sheet. The undervotes and overvotes do not count and are recorded so that the total number of ballots are accounted for at the end. When a 5th vote for the same candidate is called, a diagonal slash mark is made through the other 4 vertical tally marks indicating a 5th vote, and the markers each verbally announce, tally followed by the name of the candidate. This call-out process helps the markers know that they are on track to mark every called vote. Ideally, all 3 markers should call out tally simultaneously. If they do not all announce tally, the team will go back and research their tally sheets to find out why the count is off. Perhaps one of the markers placed a tally mark in the wrong column. If the error cannot be resolved, the sheet from the 2 markers with the same result is used as official and the team moves on. The process continues until all ballots are counted. When all the ballots in ballot box 1 are tabulated, and empty box 1 is swapped out for ballot box 2 at the voting booth where voters continued to place their marked ballots. This process continues throughout the election day. The numbers of 4-person counting teams can be scaled up to match the anticipated voter turnout for each individual polling location. At the end of the night, after the polls are closed, the remaining ballots are tabulated. After all ballots are read and counted, the markers add up all marks for all races and they should be the same. The signed, hand-marked tally sheets become part of the official voting record and everything is delivered to the courthouse under chain of custody guidelines. All counted ballots are secured in ballot box 3. There is an unofficial results or return form that is completed by the election judge. Once all precinct totals are received at the elections office, election officials combine the precinct results to determine the county-wide totals and winners. Please note that other countries, like France, Germany, the Netherlands, and Italy, recently woke up, recognized the real threat of electronic vote manipulation by socialist and Marxist who took over other countries without firing a shot, simply by placing pre-selected sympathizers in political offices. Fearing the loss of their sovereignty, these countries realized it was a non-partisan issue because no one trusted the electronic voting system results. They set aside their political parties, came together, and made it a national priority to switch to hand counting of all hand-marked paper ballots. This massive conversion was completed in as little as 6 months. Now, win or lose, all candidates can trust the hand count is accurate, transparent, and the true will of the people. The ballots are counted in one day and the citizens now trust their election system knowing that their real votes counted. It's now time for America to wake up and do the same. Unfortunately, in other nearby countries like Brazil, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, the people failed to recognize the threat of using electronic voting systems that allowed pre-selected socialist leaders and dictators to come to power. Now, the will and the freedom of the citizens is permanently suppressed in those countries. Would it surprise you to know that many of the same vulnerable electronic voting systems used in those fallen countries also have a major role in many elections in the United States? We hope you find this information of value and we encourage you to help educate and wake up your fellow citizens in every county to protect your vote. The standard Texas Chapter 65 method of hand counting of all hand-marked paper ballots may be adoptable for other states as well. Please share this information. Thank you for your time and attention.